This subject is the most important subject that you need to know about. You have to know about pelvic stability and core stability, because if you want to be at the top of your game in any sport, you need to have the core control that allows you to transmit forces from one extremity to another. The key element of core stability is nothing. It has nothing to do with crunches or super good looking abs. It all has to do with maintaining pelvic neutral and pelvic stability. I've got a few things I just want to go over with you. Things that are going to give you a background in what pelvic stability means, how to build core stability, and how this is going to affect your body and your performance in sports. So let's just get right into it, all right? The first thing, your spine is curved, and it's curved like an S shape. So, you know, if I stand like here, you can't really see with my jacket on, but what happens is, starting at my hips, the spine kind of curves back, and then it curves kind of back the other way around my lungs, and then into my neck, it curves again. This is a normal S curve for a spine. Everyone is a little different. This is not a big problem. The problem comes when we spend too much time sitting or too much time lifting, or maybe we had an injury as a child, and suddenly we have muscle imbalances that develop. And these muscle imbalances, they're not a big problem at first, but if we just keep doing these same repetitive habits, that they just put more and more stress on the spine, and they start to elongate some muscles, and other muscles they don't know how to react, so they tighten up, and pretty soon we've got a problem. And this problem manifests itself most commonly in what is known as anterior pelvic tilt. Now, anterior pelvic tilt is basically when both sides of your pelvis tilt forward. Now, you can have multiple different kinds of pelvic tilts. You can tip backwards. You can have one tip forwards, one tip, the other way. I'll get into that in future videos. But today, we want to focus on the most important one because it's the most common, and that's anterior pelvic tilt. When we get anterior pelvic tilt, what we have basically is we have tight hip flexors. These are the quads and the iliopsoas that pull the spine and the hips forward. And we end up getting a tight low back, and that's why we get so many people with complaints of low back pain. And what this also causes is it elongates our core muscles, not necessarily our abs, but what's called is the transverse abdominis, which goes around your whole core and helps stabilize your spine and all of your organs. And we also get elongated hamstrings. Now, a lot of you have probably had hamstring injuries. The hamstring and the biceps are the two commonly injured muscles in the body, I believe, because they're two muscles that cross two joints. The biceps crosses the shoulder and the elbow. That's why it's called biceps. And the hamstring is actually known as the biceps of the leg as well, because it crosses the hip and the knee. And so when we get an anterior pelvic tilt, where the hamstring attaches to the pelvis gets lengthened. Maybe it's only a little bit, but that small amount of lengthening stretches the muscle out. And when you stretch a muscle out, either two things happen. One, you get an injury, or two, you cause a reflexive contraction. And that's why we get so many people with complaints of hamstring tightness or hamstring spasm, or in my case, I actually tore my hamstring when I was a high school athlete. So let's move on here. When we get this, what you'll notice is that we have, that if I'm standing here, we got tight hip flexors. I'm going to tilt this down a little bit. Not going to be able to pull it off. That's all right. What we get is we get tight hip flexors here and a tight low back here, kind of making a diagonal. And then we have loose or kind of inefficient core muscles and inefficient hamstring muscles. So we get another diagonal. And what this is called, it's called lower cross syndrome. And this is something that Dr. Yanda talked about in his research. And what he found was that in nearly every athlete and patient, you had this predictable pattern of muscle inefficiency and overactive kind of overactive on one side and inefficient underactive on the other side. And this is not only predictable, but it extends through the whole body. So what we get is a series of injuries that are all caused by this anterior pelvic tilt. One of the first ones, as you can imagine, is if we tilt the pelvis forward, the low back arches, a little more than we would want it to be. And so this can result in low back pain, muscle spasm, and all that, typical low back stuff. But what it also causes, when you arch one part of the spine too much, the next section of the spine has to overreact. So we get this overcompensation in the thoracic spine, which is around your lungs, and then people start having breathing problems. Their shoulders are, get all out of alignment because, they're arched forward, and then the neck has to compensate for that compensation, and so we get this forward head posture, or basically just a excessive arch in the neck spine, and then we get neck pain. We've got upper trapezius spasms. We're starting to get headaches. Our lungs aren't working. Our shoulders are getting injured because they're out of alignment. You can see where it goes up there. Now let's look at lower cross syndrome, which we're talking about the lower part of the body. We tilt the pelvis forward, and what we get is a kind of a compensation reaction from the femur, and the femur internally rotates. And when it internally rotates, what it does is it's putting more stress on the hamstring, as I talked about, but it's also putting stresses on the rotating muscles of the hips. We get our knees get a little knock-kneed. The patellas get pulled to the outside, and we start to get grinding there, so we're getting patellofemoral pain syndrome. The knees are coming into the middle, and so now we've got an internal valgum, which is when the knees come into the middle. And this is going to lead to ACL injuries, and then as a compensation for the knee position, we've got the tibia and the fibula, the shin bones, they internally rotate. And then we start to get shin splints up and down, inside and outside of the legs. Our arches begin to drop in. We start to get foot pains. We get all sorts of running injuries. And you can see right down from top to bottom, anterior pelvic tilt could be the cause of any number of injuries. I mean, I can't overstate this. I mean, this is the pelvic stability is core stability, and without it, I mean, you're just setting yourself up for disaster. Let's move on here. I just wanted to talk briefly about fascia. Fascia is basically the gristle of the body. It connects everything. When you're eating like steak or something, you got that white part, and when you have a tight spot in your toes, that might be because of a tight spot in your low back, or a tight spot in your hips might cause shoulder pain. And I have never really tried it, but I know reflexology deals with trying to alleviate some of those pains. So that's something to consider. Let's get on to basically how do we correct this? And for the most people, some of these pains are going to come and they're going to go, and if you're not an elite athlete, it's not the end of the world. You're just going to have low back pain and injuries, and it's not going to affect your daily life more than a couple weeks out of the year. But if you're a competitive athlete, this stuff becomes super important, because not only will it cause injury and take you out of the game, but if you correct this stuff, you're going to be able to massively improve your performance, both through strength, endurance, power output, everything. Because once you're in line, there's no other way to describe it. You can feel how stronger you are. It's just once you practice these techniques, you begin to feel better. You feel stronger. You're able to do more repetitions. And you're not going to be worried about injuring your back during squats or deadlifts or something like that, because you know that you have the voluntary control over your core muscles. So here we go. I just finished this book. It's called Core Stability and Injury Prevention for Athletes, and I go over 4 steps that I take with every injury, no matter what the injury. These are the 4 steps I take. The first step before anything else is the symptoms. You have to get rid of the pain, and the best way to do this is ice and heat. I don't really like ice so much. Kind of moving away from that in the sports medicine world. Another successful thing that I use all the time is kinesio tape or rock tape or Perform Tex, all these different brands you can use. And you can use Topricin, some sort of cream that's going to help alleviate pain and reduce inflammation. That's step 1. Step 2, you've got to work on the mobility. And the mobility, I mean the muscles in there. And you've got to massage them. And it's not going to feel the best, but we're talking foam roll and some light stretches and some dynamic exercises as part of your warm-up. And this is going to get the muscle loosened up. I'll explain that in just a second, why we need to do that. Mobility is really important. The third step is stability. You need to do core awareness exercises. So we're talking like draw-ins, pelvic tilts, little exercises you may never have heard of. These are used by physical therapists, and occupational therapists, and athletic trainers. We'll get to those. The next one is basic exercises, but we're talking like lunges and squats, but you have to do them with this core stability, these things you just learned, but all already mastered. And then the 4th step is functional movement. You have to do advanced exercises that challenge more than just a squat or a lunge. These have to be complicated exercises that take you out of your comfort zone, that are extremely fatiguing, that challenge all the 6 qualities of sport and fitness. And so we're talking an exercise that challenges balance, flexibility, coordination, endurance, speed, and strength, all of these together. And these are the kind of exercises that if you perform them regularly, they're going to take you to the next level. So this is my strategy. I attack all injuries. I use the same strategy for friends, family, clients, athletes, you name it. This strategy is a 4-step process. You can apply to any different injury. And for the anterior pelvic tilt, it's absolutely necessary. And once you've applied it in these methods, you'll notice just amazing changes. I talked about why it's important to do mobility. And I'll just give this brief explanation why. So think of like a bicep curl, okay? If you have a ton of weight and your arm is fully extended, and you try to lift that weight, but your arm's fully extended, you're not going to be able to do it. Now, if your arm's at 45 degrees or something in a normal range of motion, it's not going to be that difficult. The same thing applies to that transverse abdominis that I mentioned earlier. This is the muscle that goes around your whole stomach, connects your spine, your hips, your lungs, and it really makes up the foundation of your core stability. This muscle, if it's stretched at all by anterior pelvic tilt, then you've got the same problem as the biceps has when it's fully stretched. It can't even contract. When you put the pelvis in neutral, this muscle immediately has the ability to provide core stability and spinal support. But until you actually loosen the hip flexors and relax the low back and bring that pelvis back to neutral, you'll never be able to fully activate the transverse abdominis, which is kind of the linchpin to the whole core stability thing. So before anything, mobility, mobility, mobility. All right, that's my intro video. If you want to know more, go to amathlete.com. This is our website for advanced movement athletics, and check out my book, Core Stability and Injury Prevention for Athletes. Cool.